If you've ever tried to understand how someone survives the kind of night that erases names, bodies, and entire plantations, and you still couldn't explain it, listen carefully. Because the truth is, survival is not always a victory. Sometimes it is a sentence, sometimes it is a transformation, and sometimes it returns as something the powerful cannot punish. If you've ever tried to escape a life that was built to keep you trapped and failed, this story will feel like a hand closing around your throat, not to hurt you, but to force you to look. This is American history as it was whispered, not as it was written. In this one-hour story, you will discover how an enslaved man vanished during a hurricane that shattered Saint-Domingue in 1791, and how, years later, he returned as a presence so unsettling that even masters lowered their voices. You will hear 10 chapters, 10 lives shaped by the same storm. The man who survived, the slave woman who noticed what others pretended not to see, the boy who saw too much, the overseer who lost control, the preacher who ran out of words, and the owner who realized too late that fear can change sides. This is a survival story, a true story in spirit, shaped from the shadows of forgotten history. No gore, no spectacle. Just the quiet terror of what happens when the world breaks and someone steps through the crack. Now, we begin with the night the world stopped obeying. The wind arrived before the rain, low and heavy, dragging the smell of salt and wet wood across the plantation like a warning breath. It pressed against bare skin, slipped through torn cotton, and found every bruise that labor had placed there. In the fields, the enslaved moved faster than usual, not because they were ordered to, but because something in the air made their bodies hurry. The sky had turned a bruised, unnatural color, and the horizon looked too close, as if it were leaning in. He stood among them, 31 years old, tall but worn thin, barefoot with cracked saws sinking into softening earth, a torn linen shirt clinging to his ribs. He lifted his head, and the calm in his eyes didn't match the panic rising around him. An overseer shouted, voice stretched tight by the wind, "Finish! Now! Move!" The words scattered into the air and came back broken. On the porch of the great house, masters appeared for a moment, faces drawn, hands gripping railings, then retreated inside as if the sky itself might accuse them. Doors slammed. Locks turned. The enslaved were left outside, in the open, where ownership meant nothing against weather. Thunder split the air with a violence that stole breath from lungs. Several people cried out, and then rain struck like thrown gravel, stinging cheeks and blinding eyes. The temperature dropped too fast, cold slicing through damp cloth, making teeth chatter. He felt it then, not fear, but recognition, as if the storm carried a message his body already understood. A fence snapped, wood cracking like bone. Metal screamed as it tore loose. The roar of the sea grew louder, closer, swallowing the shouts of men who believed they commanded everything. Then the chains failed, not heroically, not as mercy, but as physics. Rusted links snapped under strain. Debris slammed into bodies. A cart overturned. Someone screamed, then choked into silence. He was hit from the side as part of a wall collapsed, pain exploding across his shoulder, and cold water rushed in, knocking the breath from his chest. He tumbled through darkness, struck again and again by unseen objects. Salt burned his throat. Mud filled his mouth. His lungs screamed. He fought, he tried, then something inside him went still. Not surrender. Understanding. The moment he stopped fighting was the moment the world became quiet. When he woke, he was choking. Rain softened into a furious whisper through broken trees. He lay tangled in roots and splintered beams, half buried in debris, shaking so hard his bones felt like they might crack. He dragged air back into his lungs and pushed himself upright. The plantation was gone, fields erased, buildings flattened, fires drowned. The great house collapsed inward like a dead shell. Bodies lay scattered in mud, enslaved and free, master and servant indistinguishable under ruin. No orders, no shouts, no control. only wind in his breathing. He stood barefoot among wreckage and realized something more frightening than the storm. He had survived, and survival felt dangerous. He took one step, then another, waiting for someone to stop him, to call his name, to claim him. No one did. Dawn crept in gray and weak. The sea calmed. Silence settled heavy across the land, and in that silence something inside him shifted, a cold awareness that control only existed while everyone believed in it. He looked back once at the ruins, then walked forward into the broken landscape carrying nothing but breath and an unsettling calm. The mini-climax came quietly. He understood he was no longer contained by anything physical. The cliffhanger arrived colder. When the survivors returned to rebuild, they would discover the hurricane had not only destroyed the land, it had destroyed certainty, and someone would notice first. They came back speaking too loudly. Rebuilding, order, restoring property, restoring normal. But the plantation did not sound normal anymore. The storm had passed, yet something remained in the air like a held breath. She noticed it immediately. At 26, an enslaved woman with a faded cotton dress and a headscarf tied tight against sweat, she had learned to read danger the way others read letters, through rhythm and tone. The smell of mold clung to broken beams. The ground felt soft, as if it still remembered drowning. Men hammered boards back into place, and every strike sounded too sharp in the hollow quiet. Masters walked through ruins with stiff posture, pretending they were not afraid. Overseers barked orders that didn't land the way they used to. She carried water, kept her eyes lowered, listened to everything. Then she saw him at the edge of the former fields, dry while others were soaked with fresh rain. Upright, still, watching, her breath caught. She had heard whispers. He was taken. He's gone. No body. But there he was, living proof that the storm had spared someone it should have erased. Their eyes met for a moment. His gaze didn't beg. It didn't apologize for surviving. It simply rested on her like a fact, calm and unreadable, then drifted away. Later, in the dim remains of the storehouse, she heard breathing in the darkness, slow and steady. She turned and he stood there, closer scarred arms, salt-burned skin, expression unbroken. Without thinking, she whispered, "You lived." He nodded once, as if answering an obvious question. "How?" she asked, voice thin. He looked past her, toward the broken boards where light cut the darkness into narrow blades. "The storm took what it wanted," he said. His voice was low, even. The way a man speaks when shouting has never helped him. It left what it couldn't use. The words landed inside her chest like a stone. The mini-climax was not a chase, not a fight, but a truth. Survival had changed him, and the plantation could feel it. When she stepped back, her fear wasn't of him. It was of what he represented, a crack in the belief that masters controlled everything. As she hurried out, she heard a board creak behind her, then nothing. The cliffhanger followed her into the night. She wasn't the only one who had noticed him, and attention on a plantation always turned into punishment. The older man walked with a limp that never healed, his back mapped with scars that told stories no one was allowed to repeat. He was mixed race, 42, eyes heavy with memory, voice careful as if each word might be overheard by the walls. He had seen order on plantations his whole life. How masters used punishment not only to hurt, but to teach belief, how they made the enslaved fear the future more than they feared pain. When he saw the survivor moving across the rebuilt yard with that calm emptiness in his eyes, something tightened in him. That one should be dead, he murmured, not because he wanted death, but because he knew what survival could do to a man. He approached near the collapsed fence as late sun painted the ruins gold. "Keep your head down," he warned. The survivor looked at him steadily. "I already did," he replied. The older man felt the meaning under the words. Fear had already taken everything it could from him. "They don't fear chains breaking," the older man said quietly. "They fear belief breaking. The survivor's eyes flicked toward the great house. "Then they should be afraid," he said, not as a threat, but as a conclusion. The mini-climax arrived in the older man's chest, a fragile, dangerous spark hope. Not romantic hope, but the idea that something might shift without blood. He warned others in murmurs, in looks, in silence. He told the slave woman, "Watch your steps. When masters feel fear, they look for a throat to place it on." That night, the overseer's lantern moved longer than usual through the quarters, light slicing darkness, searching. The cliffhanger sharpened. Hope was the first thing masters punished, and the plantation was about to choose a target. At 18, the boy had learned how not to exist. His wrists carried bruises like memory. His body was small, but his eyes were old. He saw the survivor at night, not sneaking, not crawling, walking through spaces no enslaved man should walk. The edge of the great house, the locked storehouse, the path the masters used when they wanted to be unseen. The boy watched from shadows, heart hammering, waiting for the sound that always followed disobedience. A shout, a strike, a scream. None came. The survivor moved as if the dark belonged to him, and when he vanished, it wasn't hurried. It was natural, as if the night simply closed around him. The next day, the boy's face gave him away too pale with fear, too tight around the mouth. The overseer noticed. "Boy," he snapped, "you've got something to tell." The boy swallowed, eyes dropping. "No, sir," he lied. His voice shook. The overseer leaned in, close enough that the boy smelled tobacco and wet wool. "Lies make punishment longer," he said. The boy's hands trembled, but he held the lie because truth felt like stepping off a cliff. The mini-climax was small and powerful. The boy chose silence over obedience, and silence spread. Others noticed his fear. Whispers followed him. At night, people lay awake listening for footsteps that might not be there. The cliffhanger took shape in the overseer's mind. If something was happening, someone would pay for it, and the boy was now in the center of attention. The overseer was 37, broad-shouldered, a dark wool coat hanging heavy on him even in heat, sweat staining the brim of his hat. He was a man who understood control as a craft. You break belief, you shape behavior. You punish once, you don't have to punish twice. But after the hurricane, the plantation felt slippery. Orders had to be repeated. Eyes didn't drop quickly enough. Silence felt thicker, like a wall. He hated the feeling, not because he feared the enslaved, but because he feared the loss of the world he knew. He targeted the boy first, dragging him into the open in front of others. "Tell me what you saw," he demanded. The boy's mouth opened, closed, then he whispered, "Nothing." The overseer's jaw tightened. "Nothing is a lie," he said. He raised his hand but stopped himself, glancing around. Not defiant, not bold, but measuring. He felt it like a chill under his skin. He turned his attention to the survivor, forcing a confrontation in daylight near the rebuilt fence. "You," he said, voice sharp. "You think you're free because the storm broke a chain." The survivor looked at him calmly. "I think you're loud because you're afraid," he answered. The overseer stepped closer, nostrils flaring. "Afraid of what?" he snapped. The survivor's eyes held his. "Of someone who doesn't need you anymore," he said. The mini-climax was the overseer's internal collapse. He realized intimidation was failing. Punishment required belief, and belief was cracking. He left furious, but his fury was coated with something else: paranoia. That night, he ordered extra patrols, more lanterns, more locks. Yet the plantation only felt darker. The cliffhanger landed hard. He would try to restore control with a public example, and the plantation would hold its breath to see if fear still worked. He had been declared gone, a name crossed off, a body assumed. In a world built on records and property, being unrecorded made him dangerous. He moved through days without rushing, as if hunger no longer controlled him. He spoke rarely, but when he did, people listened. not because he demanded it, but because his calm felt contagious. The slave woman watched him from the edges, heart tight with a mix of fear and something warmer she refused to name. She approached him once by the water barrels, where the air smelled of iron and damp wood. "Go punish someone," she whispered. "They'll choose a body to prove they still can." He looked at her as if measuring the weight of her words. "They already chose," he said softly. "They just haven't admitted it." She swallowed. "Who?" He glanced toward the quarters. "Anyone who still believes they can." That night, the overseer staged his example. He dragged the boy out, voice booming, lantern light throwing harsh shadows. "This one lies," he announced. "Lies bring punishment." The boy's knees shook. The air smelled of sweat and fear. The survivor stepped forward, not fast, not dramatic, simply present. "Enough," he said. The overseer sneered. "And who are you to say?" The survivor's eyes didn't blink. "Someone you already lost," he answered. The masters watching from a distance did not intervene. They hesitated. And that hesitation was everything. The mini-climax was the first visible shift. The overseer's authority stalled in front of everyone. The boy was released not because of mercy, but because the overseer felt the crowd's belief turning. The cliffhanger struck like cold rain. If punishment failed in public, the overseer would seek a private kind of revenge. And privacy on plantations was where people disappeared. The owner was 48, pale, refined, dressed in formal clothes that no longer looked clean in the rebuilt dust. He stood at windows longer than necessary, as if expecting the horizon to move. He had believed ownership was eternal. Then a hurricane reminded him nature did not recognize papers. Now a man who should have died reminded him something worse. Neither did survival. Rumors crept into his house like damp. Servants looked up too quickly. Overseers asked for permission too often, which sounded like weakness. The owner began to dream the storm was walking through his halls. Not wind, not rain, but footsteps. He called the preacher from town, voice low. "The people are unsettled," he said. The preacher's hands gripped his Bible. "Fear breeds stories," the preacher replied. "Stories breed disobedience." The owner's lips tightened. "Then kill the story," he said quietly. He meant it without saying violence. He meant erasure, removal, disappearance. Yet the preacher looked uneasy, as if even he felt something shifting. The owner ordered the survivor brought to him. In the study, the air smelled of old paper and damp wood, a faint perfume trying to cover mold. The owner's voice was calm. "You survived," he said, as if survival required explanation. The survivor stood straight. "Yes, people are speaking," the owner said. "You will stop." The survivor's gaze did not soften. "You can't stop what you don't control," he replied. The owner leaned forward, anger contained behind manners. "I control everything on this plantation," he said. The survivor's voice stayed low. "Then why are you whispering?" The mini-climax was the owner's realization, sharp, humiliating, that he was afraid. Not of rebellion, but of a man whose existence proved control had limits. The cliffhanger followed the owner's decision. He would attempt to erase the survivor the way history erased the enslaved, quietly, efficiently, and the plantation would learn what happens when you try to erase someone who has already survived being erased. They tried to remove him without witnesses. Orders were sent through murmurs. A wagon was prepared, a night chosen. The slave woman sensed it before it happened, the way animals sense storms. The air felt too still. Men avoided each other's eyes. She found him near the ruins of the storehouse, where the smell of wet wood never left. "They're coming," she whispered. He didn't look surprised. "I know," he said. Her voice broke. "Then run." He looked at her then, truly, and for the first time she saw something beneath the calm fatigue, and a kind of sorrow that had been waiting a long time. "Escape isn't always feet," he said. "Sometimes it's what they can't reach." She swallowed hard. What can't they reach? He reached out and touched her wrist lightly. Not possessive, not romantic, just human warm skin against cold fear. What you believe, he said. Footsteps sounded outside. Lantern light cut through cracks in the boards. The overseer's voice barked, "Open it." Her heart hammered so loudly she thought it would betray them. The survivor stepped back into shadow and spoke low. "Whatever happens, stand straight," he told her. "They trained you to fold. Don't." The door slammed open, light flooding in. Men grabbed at air, at wood, at shadows. He wasn't there. Only her, standing, trembling, but upright. "Where is he?" The overseer snarled. She lifted her chin. "I don't know," she lied, and for the first time the lie felt like power. The mini-climax was her transformation. She stood straight in front of authority and did not collapse. The cliffhanger spread beyond her. If he could vanish when they tried to seize him, then the rumor would grow bigger than the man, and rumors were harder to chain. In town, the story traveled faster than truth. Taverns and markets and church pews carried it in fragments. An enslaved man taken by a hurricane, returned dry from rain, unafraid of masters, vanishing from locked rooms. Some called it superstition. Others called it judgment. The preacher stood at his pulpit, black coat tight on thin shoulders, Bible open, hands shaking slightly. He tried to shape the rumor into doctrine. Fear is temptation, he told them. Obedience is safety. Yet the words sounded thin in his own ears. Outside, the air smelled of river and damp stone. People listened with eyes too bright, hungry for meaning. After service, a woman approached him face tight, whispering, "Is it true?" He wanted to say no. He wanted to crush the story for the sake of order. But he had visited the plantation and seen the owner whisper like a man confessing. He had seen the overseer's eyes, sharp with panic. And he had felt something he couldn't preach away, the sense that survival itself had become a verdict. He told the owner privately, "You can't fight a story with locks." The owner's mouth twisted. "Then with what?" The preacher stared at his Bible. He had no answer that felt clean. The mini-climax was spiritual collapse. He realized his words could not restore the old belief. People feared the story because it suggested the enslaved were not meant to remain invisible forever. The cliffhanger arrived like dusk. If the story couldn't be killed, it would become a weapon quiet, persistent, and the owner would make a final move to bury it for good. The owner made his move not with fire or spectacle, but with paperwork and distance selling, transferring, relocating, trying to turn a man into a line item that could vanish in a ledger. A wagon waited at dawn. A route was chosen away from town, away from witnesses. The overseer believed the plan would work because it looked like order. But order was a costume now, and fear had seen beneath it. In the pale morning light, the plantation smelled of damp earth and horses, breath steaming in cool air. The slave woman stood near the quarters, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached, eyes searching shadows. She saw him once, briefly, near the tree, line upright, composed, simple dark coat borrowed or stolen, scars visible but ignored, eyes cold and luminous like stormlight. He didn't wave. He didn't call. He simply looked at her as if offering a final instruction. She remembered his words. Stand straight. The wagon rolled. Men rode alongside. The overseer watched the road with triumph he didn't fully feel. Half a mile out, the horses slowed. Not from obstacle, not from command, but from something in the air, an inexplicable heaviness, like pressure before lightning. The men exchanged glances. The overseer snapped, "Move." The horses refused, ears pinned back, nostrils flaring. Then, from the brush, footsteps approached slow, steady. The survivor stepped into view ahead of them, not bound, not chased, not running. Just there. The overseer's face drained. "How?" he began. The survivor's voice cut him off softly. "You can't transport what you never owned," he said. It wasn't a threat. It was a verdict. For a moment, no one moved. Even the men holding reins seemed unsure which world they were in. Then something extraordinary happened. The men looked at each other and made a choice without speaking. They lowered their eyes, not in obedience, but in surrender to reality, and turned the wagon around. They returned to the plantation without a fight. Not because they loved the enslaved. Not because they were brave. Because belief had collapsed, and without belief, punishment was just noise. The owner heard what happened and shut himself in his house for a day. The preacher prayed until his knees hurt. The overseer drank until his hands stopped shaking. And the enslaved quietly, carefully began to live differently. Not free, not yet, but awake. The slave woman stood in the yard that evening and realized her spine no longer bent the way it used to. She found him near the edge of the fields. "What are you now?" she whispered. He looked toward the horizon where the sea was a dark line under a pale sky. "I'm what survived," he said. "And I'm what they can't forget." She swallowed. "Will you stay?" He turned back to her, gaze intense but controlled, voice low enough that it felt like a secret. "I won't belong to this place again," he said. Then he softened, just slightly, the smallest break in the storm. "But you," he paused, as if the words cost him, "you belong to yourself. Hold on to that." The final catharsis came not as romance, but as transformation. He did not burn the plantation. He did not spill blood. He did something more terrifying to masters. He proved a person could survive, return, and refuse the shape they were assigned. He walked away before sunset, into the road that led toward uncertainty, toward escape, toward a life that history would try to bury. Behind him, the plantation stood intact in wood and nails, but broken in belief forever. And years later, when people told the story, they couldn't agree on his name. They couldn't agree on where he went. But they agreed on the feeling he left behind, the moment fear changed sides and never fully returned. If this story held your breath, imagine the one still buried in the dark. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell us which forgotten story we should uncover next.